A dismissal, silent and swift. No grand pronouncements, just a sterile email arriving in the dead of night. A cold, emotionless period to 12 years of my life. The subject line, stark and final, termination, effective immediately. I didn't weep. I simply sat there in the dim glow, allowing the stillness to drain the last vestiges of sound from the room. He believes he's triumphed. That thought drifted through my mind, a quiet echo in a vast, empty hall. No tears, not yet. Instead, I remained in the quiet, watching the words blur on the screen, my hands resting in my lap, too weary to even tremble. 12 years. 12 years dedicated to constructing intricate data frameworks from the ground up, mending vulnerabilities no one else perceived, and answering urgent calls when the entire network faltered. Not once was my name featured on a strategic presentation. Not once was a thank you uttered during the annual reviews. I was the silent force that ensured everything functioned, the unseen support behind their accomplishments. And now, I was deemed expendable. I leaned back, my gaze following the slow rotation of the ceiling fan in the darkness. In the distance, a dog barked, somewhere. A laugh drifted on the air. Life continued, oblivious that a part of mine had just been severed. A fleeting image flashed in my memory. Me, 12 years younger, stepping through those gleaming glass doors of the Mercy Medical Center. A slightly worn blazer, and a portfolio brimming with innovative concepts. I was apprehensive then, but filled with optimism. Back then, I truly believed diligent effort would speak for itself. I had faith in the system, in fairness, and now I was learning the bitter reality of being overlooked. I closed my laptop gently, as if a forceful slam would somehow amplify the harsh truth. My reflection in the dark screen appeared unfamiliar, exhausted, but not utterly broken. Not yet. Because somewhere in the quiet, beneath the initial shock and disbelief, something else was stirring. A voice, not loud, not angry, but resolute, and it whispered, "They have no idea who they just erased. They never truly knew my name. Oh, they used it in emails, tagged it in incident reports and call logs. But in the executive suites, where pivotal decisions were made, in the meetings where accolades were distributed like treats, I was invisible. Yet every single operation they relied on, every patient record, every diagnostic dashboard, every regulatory report, ran on something I meticulously constructed. I became the unseen pulse of the system, the crucial failsafe, the one they summoned when nothing made sense, when servers glitched and panic set in. No one remained later than I did. No one arrived earlier. I spent birthdays at the office, anniversaries on remote calls, and holidays whispering code fixes over a secure VPN. I wasn't resentful, not then. I believed in what we were building, in the quiet dignity of performing excellent work without needing applause. There was one night, perhaps 3 years ago, when the entire patient billing module crashed, just 15 minutes before the quarterly financial report was due. Everyone else had departed except me. I sat alone beneath those harsh fluorescent lights, eating a granola bar with one hand while debugging with the other. I rewrote 400 lines of complex logic in an hour, hot-patched the production server, and had the system fully operational again by midnight. No one inquired who fixed it. The CEO sent out a hospital-wide email the next day, commending the entire team on their resilience. I wasn't even copied. But the numbers were accurate. The calm was restored, and for a time, that was enough. There was a quiet pride in knowing the system functioned because of me, even if they never acknowledged it, even if they never spoke my name aloud. I knew, and perhaps that's what made the eventual pain so profound. 12 years of holding the hospital's digital infrastructure together. 12 years of patching vulnerabilities I didn't create, extinguishing fires I didn't ignite, and developing tools I was never asked to build, but knew they desperately needed. 12 years of listening silently as managers presented my work in their presentations, adding their own flourishes while omitting the true source. I watched individuals ascend, one by one, on the stepping stones of my quiet labor. I never complained, not once. But deep down, I always wondered if one day I simply vanished. Would anyone even notice? It turns out, I didn't need to disappear. They erased me themselves. And now, all that remains is this quiet ache in my chest and the bittersweet truth. They may not remember my name, but they still depend on every line of code I ever wrote. The chair stood empty, its worn leather slightly tilted from the way Mr. Henderson always leaned when he spoke. No one occupied it that morning, yet it still commanded the room. That chair had been there since my first day, 12 years ago, through countless system upgrades, critical data breaches, and impossible deadlines. It remained, just as I did, but now he was gone, retired quietly. No farewell luncheon, no final walkthrough. Just a brief, clipped email. Thank you all. I depart with confidence in the next generation. I had anticipated something more personal. A note, a call, a gentle suggestion to stay connected, to help guide the transition. I didn't crave a promotion. I understood the internal politics. But a chance to facilitate the handover, to be recognized as more than just a name on a back-end call sheet, I would have welcomed that. Instead, the hallway buzzed with an entirely different kind of chatter. Whispers, at first, casual. Did you hear? They're bringing in someone new. Henderson's son, I think. Yeah, Eric. The one who always sounds like he's giving a TED Talk. I knew the name, of course. Eric Henderson had visited the hospital sporadically over the years, always on a strict schedule, always with an entourage. Tall, impeccably dressed, quick to smile, quicker to interrupt. He once stopped by my workspace during a system demonstration, glanced at my triple monitor setup, and declared, "All this will be cloud-based soon." I remember staring at him in silence, not because I disagreed, but because he didn't ask what the system did. He didn't care to comprehend it, only to replace it. Now he would occupy that chair, the one worn by genuine leadership. The official announcement hadn't been made yet, but it was unnecessary. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. Words like streamline, modernize, and restructure crept into department meetings. Legacy systems were questioned, reevaluated, poked at by individuals who didn't even know which parts were critical and which were merely cosmetic. No one met my gaze when they uttered those words, because I was the legacy system. One afternoon, I passed the glass-walled conference room where Eric was meeting with senior administrators. I hadn't been invited, but I paused outside for a moment, just listening. We need to dismantle the old model. Radical change, automation, scalable architecture. Think bigger. Think revolution. No mention of the current infrastructure, of what functioned, of what quietly held everything together while they plotted their revolutions. A young analyst, perhaps 2 years into her career, walked by and whispered to me, "He wants to rebuild from scratch, like it's a video game." I nodded, but inside, something sank. Because this wasn't excitement, it was recklessness, and no one was reading the weather. A storm was brewing, a tempest of broken dependencies, botched migrations, overwritten logic. And no one was consulting the map. They didn't see the fault lines I had meticulously patched, the fragile handshake protocols, the manual overrides only I knew how to trigger. They didn't see me at all, not as a threat, not as a partner, just as someone they could sideline with a few clever phrases. Yet, I remained calm, not out of defeat, but from something sharper. An inner stillness that emerges when you realize your silence is mistaken for weakness until the system itself speaks for you. Because Eric wasn't inheriting a startup. He was inheriting a living organism, and he didn't know where its heart was. They called it a Vision Summit for Healthcare Innovation, an all-hands meeting held in the grand atrium of our headquarters, beneath the towering skylights and manufactured optimism. Folding chairs covered the polished marble floor. A sleek projector screen glowed at the front. Music from someone's corporate playlist played, upbeat, hollow, inoffensive. I sat toward the middle in my usual spot. Not in front, never in front, but close enough to see the slides, close enough to sense the tension. There had been whispers for days that Eric was planning something monumental, that he would establish the tone for his leadership, that there would be a realignment. I didn't anticipate grace, but I certainly didn't expect what followed. Eric strode onto the stage 10 minutes late, wearing a suit that seemed more like a costume, confident, polished, smirking like someone who believed he was here to rescue us. He didn't greet the team. He didn't thank anyone. He began with this. Let's discuss why we've been stagnant. The room shifted. Chairs creaked. People exchanged nervous glances. The truth is, he continued, this organization has been operating like a museum, preserving outdated practices, protecting old power structures, and worshiping gatekeepers. And then he turned and pointed directly at me. Nancy is one of those gatekeepers. A strange silence descended, not the kind born of surprise, but the kind born of fear. My stomach plummeted. I sat frozen, utterly exposed. She's the reason we've slowed down. Systems too rigid, code no one else understands, processes that belong in the last decade. I could feel every pair of eyes trying not to look at me. He wasn't finished. We don't need people who hold the keys to old doors. We need builders of new cities. The crowd didn't applaud. They didn't protest either. Just more silence. Chairs scraping, shoes shifting on the tile. I didn't move. I couldn't. 12 years, and in 30 seconds, he had reduced it all to a punchline. I wasn't just criticized. I was blamed, made the symbol of stagnation in front of every employee, every intern, every executive who had once relied on me in private. He moved on after that, his voice fading into talk about digital transformation, culture refreshes, outsourcing, innovation. But I didn't hear any of it. I was still sitting in the wreckage of that moment, not broken, but cracked wide open. Because it wasn't the insult that hurt the most. It was the theatricality of it. He had planned this, rehearsed it, chosen that exact phrase, gatekeeper, to turn the room against me without raising his voice. And no one stood up. Not one person spoke my name. Not the young analyst I mentored who now managed the cloud infrastructure. Not the department head whose entire patient scheduling pipeline I rebuilt in a single weekend. Not even the woman I once covered for when she crashed the production server and froze. When it ended, people filtered out. Quiet, scattered applause, nervous conversations. I stood slowly and walked toward the exit. And I noticed something. They all looked down. No one met my eyes. I passed 15 people, colleagues, collaborators, people who knew my work, had praised it, depended on it, and not one had the decency to say, that wasn't right. I stepped into the hallway, my hands trembling, not with rage, but with disbelief. I felt like I had been evicted from a house I had helped build, with the bricks I'd carried alone, only to be told I was the reason it never had windows. I found an empty stairwell, sat on the cold metal steps, and stared at the wall. I didn't cry, but something inside me buckled. Not the kind of break you hear, the kind that settles quietly, like a slow collapse deep beneath the surface. For the first time in 12 years, I felt like I didn't belong. Not because I changed, but because they had. Eric wanted new blood, new minds, new systems. He didn't want me, but what he didn't understand, what no one in that room seemed to understand, was that I had never clung to control. I was protecting the very system they still didn't comprehend. And if they wanted to rip it out by the roots, they'd better pray they knew how to plant something that could survive the storm. I didn't utter a word on the train ride home. The city blurred past the window. Cars, streetlights, strangers' faces, all normal, all indifferent. Yet, I felt like I had stepped outside my own skin. I kept replaying his words, the way Eric had pointed at me like I was an outdated operating manual, the way no one had objected, the way I was erased so publicly, so deliberately. And still, no one said my name. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't kick off my shoes. I walked straight to the small corner of my apartment that had always been mine. The workbench, the old server unit humming softly in the dark, the private terminal that no one at Mercy Medical ever knew existed. I opened the lid of my personal laptop. The screen flickered on with quiet familiarity. No fanfare, no filters, just code. Rows and rows of logic that felt more honest than any human voice I'd heard in days. The system unfolded in front of me, the real system, not the polished dashboards Mercy Medical loved to display to investors, not the static diagrams Eric probably skimmed through. This was the backbone, the raw framework I had built from scratch, long before anyone at the hospital understood what we'd need 5 years down the road. Redundant logic layers, silent checks, fail-safes with conditional flags so subtle they'd never notice them unless something went wrong. And it was all still alive, still pulsing with the breath of every sleepless night I'd poured into it. They didn't know it existed, not like this, because I never gave them the full map, not out of pride, but out of protection. I knew the risks. I had seen how organizations forgot the hands that built their empires, how systems were pushed to scale beyond comprehension without care for the humans who maintained them. So I wrote in safety valves, ethical delays, soft brakes that only activated under pressure, like the kind they were about to unleash in their rush to modernize. It wasn't sabotage. I didn't plant traps. I planted truth. And now, as I stared at my own code, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel until this very moment. Rage. Not loud, not reckless, but slow-burning, controlled. The kind of rage that comes after betrayal. I had been loyal, devoted. I had sacrificed years, birthdays, weekends. I had protected that system like a living thing. And when it came time to evolve, they didn't invite me to guide it forward. They called me dead weight. And in that moment, something in me shifted. I wasn't going back. Not to ask, not to beg, not to prove my worth. Because my worth was already written in every line of this architecture, in every safeguard that would now begin triggering quietly as Eric's team stumbled through the maze they didn't understand. I had coded for resilience, not obedience. I'd built a system that only worked when understood, that protected itself from misuse, from ego, from ignorance. I stared at one particular module, an adaptive routing logic I had embedded 3 years ago. It wasn't just smart, it was ethical. It paused patient orders that violated internal fairness policies, rerouted queries if they flagged discriminatory patterns. Eric would disable that. He'd call it inefficient. And in doing so, he'd break more than just code. He'd break trust. But I wouldn't stop him. I wouldn't interfere. Because now I understood the power of silence. I didn't need to tear anything down. I just needed to step back, let the foundation I'd built, quietly, thanklessly, begin to collapse under their careless weight. Not out of vengeance, but out of truth. Truth embedded in the very systems they never bothered to learn. They would see the delays, the breakdowns, the unexplained outages, and they would wonder why. Why the platform that had run seamlessly for years was now coming apart. And some of them, just some, would remember me. Not with gratitude, but with recognition. Because silence isn't weakness. It's choice. It's precision. And if I've learned anything from 12 years of writing systems no one ever cared to understand, it's that sometimes the loudest message is the one that doesn't need a voice. The first crack appeared on day 3. It was small, subtle even, a patient billing discrepancy. Some employees received half of what they were owed, others got nothing at all. A few had duplicate deposits. HR sent out a vague internal message blaming a glitch in the vendor API. I smiled. It wasn't malicious. I hadn't done anything. I hadn't touched a single script. But I recognized the fault lines they were tripping over, the safeguards they didn't know existed, code that required sequence-specific authentication, or audit flags that delayed payments when anomalies weren't manually cleared. They had removed me, but left my logic intact. By day 5, patients were complaining. Support tickets piled up. Appointment confirmations never arrived. Prescription orders were delayed or missing. The call center system started lagging, freezing mid-conversation. Agents rebooted, relogged, restarted. Nothing held. They tried switching to backups. Those backups? I'd built them too. Not to sabotage, never that. But they weren't designed to function without the logic map I carried in my head. They weren't broken. They were just misunderstood. Then came day 7. The hospital's inventory systems went down. Medical supplies froze mid-scan. Barcode inputs returned errors. Patient admissions halted. Logistics teams scrambled, trying to override scripts they didn't even know existed. Someone, I assume it was Eric, gave the order to run a global reset. That was the moment everything collapsed. 6 months of patient transaction logs gone, wiped clean. I didn't need to be in the building to hear the chaos. The silence on social media spoke volumes. The lack of automated patient reminders. The desperate tone in the public-facing announcements. We are currently experiencing technical difficulties. Translation: we lit a match in a forest we didn't know was flammable. I sat on my balcony, watching the sun go down, a cup of coffee in hand. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't gloating. I was watching. Just watching. I'd spent 12 years making that system smarter, stronger, self-correcting, but only when guided properly. It wasn't built for blind hands, and now they were learning that the hard way. I thought I'd feel satisfaction, maybe even vengeance, but instead, I felt stillness. I'd already mourned what I'd lost, my dignity, my career, my place in that organization. That happened the day Eric pointed at me in front of everyone. This wasn't revenge. This was gravity. And to Eric, he had walked off the cliff long before he realized it. I imagined him in his glass office now, sleeves rolled up, pacing, sweat gathering behind his neck, barking orders at engineers too junior to fix what they didn't build, calling consultants who offered nothing but buzzwords and invoices. The board must have been livid, investors anxious, deadlines missed, trust shattered. And me? I hadn't moved a finger. That was the irony. I didn't have to fight back. I didn't have to hack or sabotage or leak. The system spoke for me, and it was loud, louder than any defense I could have made in that town hall, louder than any resume or reference. Every failure they face now, every crash, delay, lost patient revenue, it was a sentence in a language they never bothered to learn. I didn't need to say I told you so. The logs did, the logs I had structured, the ones they erased without reading. And still, beneath it all, I felt a strange grief. Because I hadn't just built systems, I had built trust. And they destroyed it. Not just mine. The trust of patients, of employees, of partners who had counted on reliability, and were now watching it fall apart like a house of cards. This wasn't just Eric's downfall. It was the unraveling of a place I had once believed in. I sipped my coffee, the sky turning deep orange, and in the distance, I imagined the alerts piling up. Red, flashing, unread. They still didn't see me, but they were starting to feel me. And soon, they would understand. The headlines hit like thunder. Mercy Medical System meltdown. No one knows how it works. CEO gamble. Backfires. Infrastructure unravels. She didn't break it, she just walked away. At first, I tried to avoid them. I muted news alerts, closed tabs before they loaded, ignored the messages stacking up in my inbox. But curiosity has claws. By the second day, I couldn't look away anymore. The story had gone viral. What started as a leak from an internal email, someone forwarding a panicked thread about Eric's reset order, exploded across tech blogs, LinkedIn forums, and eventually mainstream outlets. They all asked the same question. How does a healthcare system spend $18 million on a platform only one person understood? That one person was me. My name appeared in comment sections, group chats, even investor circles. Sometimes misspelled, sometimes shortened to N. But I was there. Whispered like a ghost, they were suddenly desperate to summon. One thread from a former product manager read, "Nancy used to stay up all night making sure our patient portals didn't crash. She never asked for credit. Now the system's falling apart, and the CEO who pushed her out is in hiding." Another, more viral. "She didn't sabotage anything. She just pulled her hand away, and they realized the machine doesn't run without her touch." I read that one twice, maybe 10 times. It felt surreal. For years, I was background noise, the tech person, the fixer, the one they forgot to invite to strategic dinners, but always remembered at 3 a.m. when a database crashed. Now they were rewriting me into their mythology. Some were reaching out too, quietly, cautiously. A junior data analyst I trained messaged, "They're calling you the spine of the system." An old QA specialist added, "Eric's been silent for days. I think they're panicking. A few board members are asking why you weren't kept on." And then there were the patients and partners. 3 major insurance contracts terminated within 48 hours. One longtime medical device supplier issued a formal statement. "We cannot continue operations with a platform showing such fundamental instability." Investors were spooked. Share prices dipped. Angry voices filled the earnings call transcript. One line stood out to me. "This isn't just a technical failure. It's a failure of leadership, communication, and basic risk management." Eric hadn't been seen since day 8. The man who stood under stage lights and pointed at me with mockery was now buried under NDAs, legal shielding, and PR-crafted statements. Funny how fast the spotlight turns. And me? I stayed silent, not out of spite, but because silence had become its own kind of power. When you've been erased, dismissed, humiliated, there's a certain grace in letting the truth speak for itself. I didn't need to defend myself. The evidence was the defense. The broken system, the public collapse, the desperate scramble, the echo of my name in places it had never been spoken before. But beneath the wave of vindication, there was something deeper stirring in me, something raw. For years, I had carried the weight of that system, believing my value didn't need to be visible. That dignity meant staying quiet, working hard, and not asking for applause. Now I realized silence can be grace, but it can also be erasure. And this wasn't a comeback. It was an exhale, a release of 12 years of tension, of being unseen while holding everything together. One article in particular cut straight to my core. A journalist, Clearly someone who understood code and people had written a long-form piece titled "The Woman They Tried to Replace Was the Architecture Itself." The final paragraph read, "Nancy didn't need to sabotage the company. She just stopped holding it up." The silence wasn't vengeance. It was gravity. I closed the laptop. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like peace. Not triumph, not pride. The kind that comes after a storm, when the wreckage is visible and the sun has the audacity to rise again. I wasn't broken. They were. And they were the ones who'd have to live in the ruins they created, without ever realizing they bulldozed the foundation. The message came at 2:16 a.m. "Nancy, please come back. Just tell me what you want. Eric." I stared at it for a full minute. The screen glowed faintly in the darkness of my bedroom, the familiar sting of blue light on sleepless eyes. I didn't reply. I didn't even move. There was a time when a message like that would have shaken me, would have triggered years of learned obedience, of being the fixer, the quiet savior in the background. But not now. Now I just turned the phone face down and let the silence return. Over the next few days, the texts multiplied. Eric's tone shifted from urgency to apology to desperation. "We're hemorrhaging contracts. The audits are exposing holes we didn't even know were there. No one understands your core logic tree, not even the international consultants." He flew in a team from London, another from Singapore, people with long resumes and bigger egos. They dissected the system, reviewed logs, pulled thread after thread, hoping to find a way to stabilize what had already begun collapsing. But I had designed the framework like a living organism. It adapted, protected, and resisted when touched improperly. By the 5th day of radio silence, I received one final message from him. No subject, just a voice memo. I wasn't going to play it, but something in me flickered. Maybe curiosity, maybe closure. I listened. His voice was low, quieter than I'd ever heard it. Hoarse. "I said you were the bottleneck, the old guard, someone holding us back. But I see it now. I was the one who didn't understand the terrain. And now I'm leading a team into a place only you ever truly mapped." He paused. "They called you the gatekeeper. I called you obsolete. But I was the one who walked into a locked room and threw away the key. You didn't break anything. You just stepped back. And now I can't stop the bleeding." His voice cracked slightly. Then silence. A click. The message ended. I sat motionless, not out of revenge, not out of spite, but because I had nothing left to give him. I had offered loyalty, consistency, stability. He answered with humiliation, and now he wanted a rescue. But some ruins aren't meant to be rebuilt. A week later, a former colleague sent me a photo. Eric sitting alone in the big glass conference room where he had once called me out in front of the entire organization. Now he was slouched forward, elbows on the table, staring at a wall of red error screens. The caption beneath the image, leaked no doubt by someone within. Eric called her the problem, but it turns out he was the one no one needed. The story spread fast. Screenshots, memes, commentaries on leadership, on ego, on the hidden cost of dismissing quiet power. And still, I said nothing. Not because I wasn't tempted, but because I'd already said everything I needed to through the code I left behind. The architecture that still pulsed with my logic, refusing to obey careless hands. There was a strange peace in watching the collapse from a distance. Not because I wanted to see him suffer. I didn't. But because, for once, the truth had taken center stage without me needing to push it forward. For so long, I'd thought the only way to survive was to stay small, invisible. Let others talk. Let them take the credit. And eventually, maybe someone would remember who kept the lights on. But the lights were out now. And when darkness fell, The one person they ignored became the only person they searched for. Not because I demanded it, but because the system I built refused to run without me. That was the irony. Eric had tried to erase me, but in doing so, he made me unforgettable. It started with a whisper, just like most reckonings do. An internal memo, anonymous source, untraceable, yet undeniable. A week after the last crash, the parent corporation dispatched an independent investigation unit. Not internal HR, not a friendly audit team. Real investigators, cold, clinical, and utterly uninterested in excuses. They interviewed everyone, from the patient intake reps to the engineers Eric had flown in from Europe. They pulled access logs, dug into 2 backup systems, analyzed months of executive decisions. They even traced internal communication history, timestamps, message deletions, flagged terms like reset, override, and more damningly, gatekeeper. It didn't take long. Within 4 days, the preliminary report leaked. Misuse of executive power, public personnel defamation, gross negligence in system management. And beneath it all, one brutal line stood out. Eric Henderson directly contributed to the destabilization of mission-critical infrastructure by dismissing the sole system architect without transitional safeguards. They used my title, System Architect, for the first time in writing. I didn't smile, not quite, but I exhaled, slow, quiet, like letting go of 12 years of breath I'd been holding. That same evening, the company issued an emergency press release. Effective immediately, Eric Henderson has been placed on indefinite leave pending further investigation. What they didn't say publicly, but what everyone knew privately, was that his corporate access was revoked by sundown. His badge deactivated. Personal company assets frozen, including the discretionary fund he had used like a personal playground. The news broke across every tech outlet by morning. CEO, amidst infrastructure collapse. Henderson legacy implodes. Son, removed from executive role. System failure. Traced to leadership arrogance, not technology. But the headline that stuck with me the most came from a lesser-known, fiercely independent business column. He forgot the foundation. Eric tried to modernize the hospital by mocking its architect, but a castle with no foundation is just sand waiting for rain. I read it slowly, word for word, in the same spot where I had first opened his midnight termination email. Same couch, same stillness. But a different woman sat there now. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt resolved. Because this wasn't revenge. It was gravity, pulling everything back into balance. They had tried to turn me into a cautionary tale. Instead, I became proof that you can erase a name from the org chart, but you can't delete the architecture that name left behind. You can fire the builder, but the beams still carry her blueprint. In the days that followed, something strange began to happen. Former colleagues started reaching out, not to ask for help, not to pull me back in, but to apologize. Quiet, awkward messages. People who had looked away in the atrium. People who hadn't spoken up. I should have said something when he humiliated you. We knew it was wrong, but we were scared. You didn't deserve that. I didn't respond to most of them, not out of cruelty, but because I'd already moved past needing those words. I had found peace, not in being seen again, but in knowing I never needed their permission to matter. Eric, on the other hand, had vanished. No LinkedIn updates, no conference invites. Rumors swirled of lawsuits, clawbacks, investigations into his handling of vendor contracts, and unapproved budget overrides. It's amazing how quickly silence follows when a name loses its currency. And still, not once did I gloat. I didn't leak documents. I didn't give interviews. I didn't write an exposé. Because the truth had already spoken loud enough, clean enough. His fall was not my doing. It was his own weight, unchecked and inflated, collapsing inward. He thought he was the storm, but he never saw the fault line beneath him. And I wasn't the storm either. I was the architect of the ground he ignored. It was a quiet morning, nothing dramatic, no storms, no headlines. Just the hum of my coffee machine and the sun slanting through the kitchen blinds. I had stopped waiting for anything. I wasn't rebuilding a resume. I wasn't scrolling job boards. I wasn't trying to force a chapter into existence. Then the email came. Subject: Invitation to discuss a new future. From Elena Royce, CEO, Bright Care Solutions. I read it once, then again, slowly, carefully. Nancy, we followed the Mercy Medical situation closely, not for gossip, but for insight. Your silence spoke louder than any keynote. We don't want your code. We want your mind. We're offering you the role of Chief Technology Officer with full autonomy. Your only condition: that no engineer under your watch will ever be unnamed again. We don't erase names. We honor them. I sat back in my chair, stunned. Not flattered, not suspicious, just moved, because they hadn't offered me a project or a salary bracket. They had offered me something no one at Mercy Medical ever did: respect. Not for the system I built, but for how I think. The role was more than symbolic. Bright Care Solutions was known for their clean execution, their transparent architecture, their progressive stance on intellectual credit. Their systems worked not because they were flashy, but because they were built on dignity. Elena had always been different. I'd met her briefly at a conference years ago. She had no interest in buzzwords or titles. She asked about legacy code, not to replace it, but to understand it. Now she was offering me the space to lead without ego, without games. It took me an hour to respond, not because I hesitated, but because I wanted my answer to carry weight. I wrote, "Thank you, Elena. I accept on one condition of my own, that every engineer's name appears on every build they contribute to. If we're going to build something sustainable, we build it with visibility baked into the codebase. No more silent ghosts keeping systems alive." Her reply came within minutes. "Agreed. We're not just hiring a CTO. We're rebuilding the blueprint." And just like that, the air changed. Not because I was returning to the industry, but because I wasn't returning as the same woman who once waited for credit in shadows. This time, I wasn't coding in silence. I was leading with intention. The first team meeting was surreal. 30 engineers on screen, most younger than me, some visibly nervous. They knew who I was now. Stories travel faster than code, but what they didn't know was that I wasn't there to be a savior. I was there to clear space. I opened with one simple slide, a single sentence. If you built it, your name stays on it. The chat lit up, a few nods, a quiet cheer. One junior dev messaged me privately. "This is the first time I felt seen since joining." And that's when it hit me. What I lost at Mercy Medical wasn't just a job. It was the belief that doing good work quietly, steadily, would one day be enough. But it can be enough. It just needs the right soil. At Bright Care Solutions, we didn't rebuild Mercy Medical's broken empire. We started something new, clean, credited, collaborative. The first major deployment was codenamed Phoenix. Someone else's idea, not mine, but I smiled when I saw it, because they understood. Not just what I had built, but what I had endured. The burn, the fall, the silence, and now, the rise. I didn't need headlines anymore. I didn't need Eric's apology. I had something far rarer. A team that saw the architecture and the architect. And this time, the foundation bore all our names. You don't just rebuild a system. You rebuild the way people think about systems. When I first stepped into Bright Care Solutions' new development center, walls still smelling of fresh paint, cables half run through the floors. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. Not for control, not for redemption, for change. Real cultural change. We weren't here to write better code. We were here to write code that knew better. The team I handpicked wasn't made of top-tier resumes or Ivy League stars. It was made of observers, quiet disruptors, engineers who'd been overlooked, passed over, labeled too junior, too soft-spoken, not leadership material. I knew those labels well, so I built a space where none of them mattered. We called our first principle, Code with Conscience. It wasn't a slogan. It was a standard. You're not writing for approval, I told them during our first all-hands. You're writing for protection, of users, of ethics, of each other. And we meant it. Every commit was tagged with author credits. Every build included contribution logs. Every meeting started with, "Who hasn't spoken yet? Let's hear from them first." The first few weeks were bumpy. Some of the junior engineers didn't know how to speak up. They weren't used to being asked. One afternoon, I caught Ava, a brilliant back-end developer 2 years out of college, deleting a snippet of code she'd written for an access protocol. "Why'd you pull it?" I asked gently. She looked startled. I thought it might seem overprotective, like I was overthinking. I reviewed it. She had built in a 3-layer failsafe that would have stopped exactly the kind of cascading data breach I'd seen sink Mercy Medical. I restored her commit. Then I did something even more important. I invited her to lead the security sub-team, not because she was perfect, but because she thought ahead. That became another principle. We promote foresight, not just output. By month 3, the culture shift was palpable. Engineers started suggesting safeguards before being asked. They wrote documentation like stories, why they did something, not just what. And most revolutionary of all, we started designing a system that could feel, not in the artificial intelligence sense, but in the ethical sense. A digital conscience built on behavioral logic trees, context-aware responses, and real-time audit feedback. If someone tried to bypass access controls too many times, the system didn't just block them. It alerted a human reviewer and prompted a self-check. Are you acting in alignment with our values? Some called it preachy. Others said it would never scale. But I'd seen what scaled without conscience, and it cost me 12 years of invisibility. Not here. Not again. One afternoon, while reviewing a new version of our user management module, I paused on a single line of code written by a second-year developer named Omar. He'd added a comment. If the system begins to favor power over people, reset the priority tree. I sat back in my chair, smiling. They were getting it. They weren't just building software, they were building justice. Quiet, embedded justice. One conditional statement at a time. We called it the integrity layer. It ran parallel to every core function, silent, watchful, ready to intervene if something strayed too far from our principles. It didn't control the system. It guided it, like a compass. Not perfect, but directionally honest. When we launched the first product built entirely on these values, it wasn't flashy. No viral launch party, no bold promises. Just one message at the top of our changelog. This was written by people who believe systems should protect the vulnerable, not just serve the powerful. That post alone drew hundreds of new applicants. Not because we were the biggest company, but because we were the most human. And for the first time, I felt something stronger than validation. I felt hope. Not for myself. For the next generation of engineers who would never have to hide in the server room to make a difference. Because now they were part of something built with names, with conscience, with care. And me? I was no longer the ghost in the code. I was the architect of a system that remembered everyone. The rain tapped gently against the glass as I sat alone in my new office. No noise, no urgency, just the hum of a system running smoothly and the soft pulse of a future unfolding without fanfare. I leaned back in my chair and opened the terminal, more out of habit than necessity. The interface was different now, sleeker, cleaner. But buried deep in the archives was something familiar, a string of code from more than a decade ago, untouched, still intact. It was one of the first lines I had ever written for Mercy Medical, back when I was still wide-eyed, believing that doing things right would be enough. It wasn't complex. It didn't revolutionize architecture. But it was mine. And in the comments section, just above the function, I had typed something almost no one ever saw. Write systems that serve, never systems that silence. My breath caught. I hadn't remembered writing it, but reading it now, it felt like a message I'd left for my future self. A reminder that I had always known what mattered, even when others didn't. I didn't need to punish Eric. I didn't need to destroy Mercy Medical. I just had to remove my hands and let the truth speak in my place. And it did. Louder than I ever could have. Some people think silence is weakness, that if you don't scream, you're surrendering. But silence, when chosen, is strength. It's patience. It's precision. It's power refined. I turned off the monitor, not in defiance, but in peace. Because this time, my name was not erased. It was etched into every pillar of the system we had built together, openly, without fear. And that's when I knew. This story was never about revenge. It was about return.